so I had to do some research for this one. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and welcome back to the channel. Hello everyone, if you enjoy what I do, including tier lists about turn-based strategy RPGs and the discussion that spawns, like for things such as Tactics Ogre Reborn, Final Fantasy Tactics, Fire Emblem, stuff like that, then a like on this video and a subscription to the channel would be very much appreciated. Thank you so much. So yes, today we are discussing the final set of units and classes that we need to cover for Tactics Ogre Reborn for its set of tier lists, monsters, beasts, dragons, etc. And this one's actually going to be a lot of fun. I had to do a lot of research for it. You're going to see me glancing over here at my second monitor quite a bit because I actually have what started as a notes document and almost turned into a little bit of a script. So apologies if I'm not always looking at the camera, at least when I first get started here, because there's a fair bit to cover. Monster units are super interesting in Tactics Ogre Reborn. They are something that I have utilized and I've definitely advocated for, especially early in the game, but I got kind of away from them near the end of my main series, and that's kind of a shame because there's really a lot going on here for them, so let's talk about it. As always, we are judging these monsters in a vacuum against one another. I know I risk a scolding from Mr. Coffee Potato, who I do recommend you go check out his content. As always, he has phenomenal in-depth analysis of pretty much everything and anything that I've talked about in Tactics Ogre, and he does it better than me. So, like, go check out his stuff. Phenomenally insightful creator and knows this game like the back of his hand. But I know, as a result, I risk getting told off by him for saying this. None of these beasts are S rank compared to something like a shaman or a white knight or a lich or anything like that, right? They're just not. If we're doing a comprehensive class tier list of everything in the game, monsters are not going to be at the top. But by looking at them against each other, we can see what is the top of the food chain, right? If I ever do that massive class tier list, we'll see where they fall. But for now, we're doing them solo. Also, it's worth noting that we're only discussing the recruitable monsters here. There are a bunch of really cool, like, recolored variants in things like San Bronsa, the Palace of the Dead, different dungeons, different special battles that maybe have better stats or different fancier abilities, things like that. We don't get access to them, so we're not going to be talking about them here. Cool as they are. I wish we could get access to them, but they'd be kind of broken. Now, as far as monsters as a whole, there's a little bit that we need to discuss here, and this is where some of my notes come in, so I'll be looking over here. They start out dealing very respectable to outright pretty good damage early in the game, but by end game, their damage falls off a lot more, and they transition into more support and tank roles, which there's nothing wrong with. You need to have those types of units, right? And they do that job very well. As such, we won't really be ranking these guys based on their damage. We will discuss it at certain points, but it's not the main focus. Instead, we're talking about their utility in other ways, how they make monsters still very solid choices throughout the end of the game, and still fun to use. Keep in mind as well, classes that support monsters, such as Beast Tamers, Witch, Warlock, can also boost damage for those different monster classes. But again, it's not really my focus here, as it's still not the best role for monsters, and it falls outside of their inbuilt class skills and everything, so we're not talking about that. Finally, it's worth pointing out that monsters have a base suite of abilities that they all have access to. Their lack of equipment generally makes them pretty fast with low RT, and they all have access to things like Dash, Pincer Attack, Constitution, the various normal skills that you would expect that let them get into melee, trade blows, fun stuff like that. It's what's beyond that, though, where they have a pretty wide array of abilities at their disposal that really is what's noteworthy. So we're going to talk about what makes them special. Now, first off, we're starting with dragons here. We have dragons, then we're going into the beasts, and finally, golems. Dragons are very tanky, status-inflicting units that also reflect damage at the enemy. They have the same skills across the board, other than their unique flavor of elemental breath, so we'll talk about those skills here. But each of those breaths does have a different status effect that it inflicts, and that's where we're going to see maybe some shifting in the tier list between each flavor of dragon. That's why we've got them all separated out here. As far as the skills that they all share, they have Toxic Breath, which deals dark damage and inflicts leaden. They have Rampart Aura, which is very nice for any sort of area control unit. Tail Crush, which deals okay crushing damage, as the name implies. Their Charged Resonance skill that matches the element of the dragon, which weakens enemies around them against that element, and also gives themselves and their allies the touched version of that element, which applies it to their attacks, giving them bonus damage. Very nice, very powerful ability. They can grant themselves a 100% chance to hit, and the ability to not be parried or deflected with their skills. And most importantly, this is the fun one, they get Dragon Scale. which anyone who knows Tactics Ogre, of course, knows Dragon Scale is incredibly nasty. Reduces the damage that they take by 80%, and then reflects the rest of the damage that they took back at whatever hit them with that damage. This obviously makes them incredible damage sponges that allow them to still deal decent damage that scales with the enemies in the game, making their own actual damage output not as important, because they're going to be good against whatever you're fighting, because it's the enemy's power level that determines how much damage they're dealing back, right? It's kind of fun like that. This also makes them a great candidate, and I would argue the best candidate in the game for zombification, because you can zombify monsters, as it makes for a character or a class that is never going to die. Unless it gets exercised, which the enemy very rarely does. It can happen, but it very rarely happens. Unless they get exercised, even if that zombie dragon gets downed, they will get back up eventually, and in the process of getting downed, they've done... I mean, can't even imagine how much damage they would have dealt, because dragons usually have upwards of, 3,000 HP? So, to have killed a zombie dragon that's using Dragon Scale over and over again, the enemies dealt a lot of damage to themselves as well, which makes them hysterically fun to use. Highly, highly, highly recommend. So, as a result, we're not going to have a single dragon that's below B tier. Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. Just their overall utility is so nice. They're pretty much all going to be at minimum B tier, and then a few of them are going to have their different elemental breaths that push them higher than that. I think that's a pretty solid baseline. Yeah. So, let's go through here really quick. Cloud dragons get Misstep. Misstep, pretty lame due to the way that targeting and accuracy works in Tactics Ogre. You're not really going to need the ability to have a dodgy character not be able to dodge anymore, because nothing's really dodging anyway. The only time that you're dodging attacks or deflecting damage, things like that, is when you're using specific skills for it. I know there are edge cases, but like 99% of scenarios, nothing's dodging anything. Nothing's missing in Tactics Ogre once you get out of the very early game, right? Just with the way scaling works. So Misstep, not particularly useful. Certainly a perfectly fine option if you want to just go for that tanky kind of damage dealer. Because again, like all the breath attacks wind up being AoE once you get to the rank 2 version of it. You can deal okay damage with it. It's not bad at all. But Misstep, it's a little bit of a misstep to try to use it. Hey! Now, Earth Dragon, same exact thing. Misstep makes it harder for a unit to dodge ranged attacks. Stagger makes it harder for a unit to dodge melee attacks. It's really not going to be relevant in any way. And then other than that, it's exactly the same as Earth Dragon, or Cloud Dragon, but it deals earth damage. Obviously, Cloud Dragons deal air damage. If you have a specific elemental team that they're going to slot into that's dealing one type of elemental damage, cool, great. But as far as their unique actual status application goes, nothing special. Pretty much kind of sucks, actually. Honestly, I wonder... at the end, we'll see. I might actually wind up moving some of the different elemental dragons down now that I think about it. We'll come back to that. Next up, we have our Thunder Dragons with False Strike. Again, this is where we have a little bit of a sad scenario here, because False Strike, units' accuracy with melee attacks, is reduced. Anything with accuracy, not going to be particularly useful, so it's going to go in the same tier. Now, Flood Dragon. Flood Dragons, instead of messing with anything to do with accuracy, inflict Breached. And anyone who knows anything about the way that Tactics Ogre Reborn works knows that Breached is insanely good. It will literally just make everything better when it comes to damage output by reducing a target's defenses across the board, the resistance to damage, that makes them S tier. Easily. Easily. A zombified Flood Dragon with Dragon Scale and its Aqua Breath, if you want to have resonances on it to boost damage even further, cool, go for it, is going to be a nightmare for the enemy to deal with on the battlefield. You're throwing around a Breached like crazy. They're not able to hurt the damn thing. They're hurting themselves when they hit it. When they finally kill it, it gets back up. It can throw a complete wrench into the enemy formation by having Rampart R on. Like, it's so good, man. It's just so incredibly good. It's one of the best monster options that you can have. I do not blame you if you like to rock a Flood Dragon pretty much all the time, because I certainly do. Absolutely. Then we have Flame Dragon with Weaken. Not nearly as good as Breached, but still not bad, because you're still doing a similar type of thing, right? You're reducing the amount of damage that the enemy is dealing to you. Not as universally beneficial, I would say, because there's going to be times where, your units just aren't getting hit, or you have tanky units that aren't taking a ton of damage in the first place, whereas all of your units pretty much want to be able to deal more damage if they have the opportunity, which is what the Flood Dragon allows you to do. But making it set enemies just dealing less damage across the board is certainly not bad either. Then we have Frost with False Flight. And again, like with False Strike, we're messing with accuracy. No thank you. Certainly a good unit across the board, but its special status effect, not really worth it. Now, Arc Dragons, our light boys, I think deserve to go up with Flame Dragons as well, because now they've got Spoil Spell, so you're looking at reduced magic attack power. Very similar to Weaken, however, you are going to be seeing it less. You know, there's generally less mages on the battlefield than things that are dealing physical damage, which is what the Flame Dragon specializes in reducing. But at the same time, you're also looking at a point where if you're hitting casters with Dragon Breath attacks, they're probably not long for this world in the first place. They're generally going to be pretty squishy in that regard. So they're probably just going to die. And a unit that's dead can't deal damage in the first place. But if you're in a scenario where you've got some sort of tanky caster that you can't just drop in the first place, being able to just reduce the damage that it can deal is still nice. It's still a good effect. I think they deserve A for that. And then finally, we have Dark Dragons and Hydras. Dark Dragons are dealing in Enfeeble, which I have my cheat sheet here so that I can remember what everything does. Unit's defense against magical attacks is reduced. Certainly not bad. And again, it's better than the baseline accuracy stuff. It's not the best effect around, which maybe this will get adjusted if I wind up moving these dragons down. I'm thinking about it more and more. But for now, I think it goes in A. Anything that's messing with damage is pretty solid. And finally, Hydra, which actually poisons, which is nice. I'm not going to say it's S tier necessarily, but being able to apply some poison sometimes and get some extra damage in is not terrible. So I think that deserves A tier as well. And that's the majority of the list done already. There's a lot of different dragons, and you do have to consider what each of them is doing separately. But yeah, we might wind up doing some shifting around here. Overall, very, very nice units, though. Don't get me wrong. Very, very solid. Next up, we have the Beasts, and this is where we have some fun stuff going on. We've starting with the Cyclops here. The Cyclops is weird, because the Cyclops is the only monster class that can use magic, and they can use all of the schools of magic except for Divine. In the elemental spells, they're just using your basic like single target missile attacks and your AoE attacks, but in Dark, they actually get pretty much all of the status utility spells, so like your status inflicting like Petrify, Stun, Poison, other things like Spell Charge and different stuff like that, which can be fun. There's some fun niche uses there, but the issue is that their actual magic stat is not very good, so they're not really going to be dealing much damage with any of those skills. Utility stuff, that can be better, something where you're actually like not looking at a chance to apply, but it just does it, like again your Spell Charge. That's not terrible, not a bad option for them. Now, where they really shine, though, is they have a bunch of really weird 1 and 2 range status-inflicting attacks, abilities, and some damage-dealing attacks. First off, they can stun enemies within 2 tiles. They can hobble enemies in 1 tile with just auto skills. Then they can have a bunch of different melee attacks that deal crushing damage, that can hobble, stop, spoil heal, leaden, or apply misstep. They also, like I said, have all those different spells. They're pretty durable. They've got a lot of HP, but they're not particularly tanky. They don't get something that reduces damage. They don't have the ability to, beyond just like stunning things or potentially stopping things. And they don't have like Rampart Aura, things like that. So the role that you're kind of filling with them is trying to get them to move as quickly as possible, which they can. You know, they have dash. They've got low RT. They can put it on a pretty decent turn of speed. Run them into the enemy front line, and then just start throwing status effects around and generally being a giant bully. They're not going to deal a ton of damage. They'll deal some, you know, enough to be at least applying some helpful damage dealing. But the main thing is just like, you've got a giant, smelly, weird dude in your front line, and now all of your guys are like misstepping and like losing some of their attacks. They're not having the ability to have their full combat effectiveness. Some of them are just getting outright stopped. Like, it's just, it can actually be pretty nasty. Then if you want to throw in some different status effect magic, or even just some AoE magic if they have some MP to throw around and you want to use it, cool, great. They're a weird unit, man. I don't really know where I want to put them. I don't think they're necessarily C tier. Especially by the end game. I mean, I think they're solidly B, I would say. The issue is that you want enemies to be clustered up enough that you can actually get big AoE on things like the stun. And that isn't always going to be applicable, especially when you start getting into things like, you know, Palace of the Dead and San Bronson, where terrain is all messed up and you aren't necessarily going to get big clusters of enemies all the time. But when you can use it, it's solid. I would say it's a solid B tier. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's fair. We're going to adjust some things at the end here, but I think B is good. Now, Cockatrice and Griffin, man. These are fun. These are really, really fun. Cockatrice, I think, is honestly an S-tier class. It's just so good. So, Cockatrice and Griffin, basically the same class with one major difference. And I think because they're so similar, we're going to then immediately drop Griffin in A, and then we'll talk about them both simultaneously. So, Griffins, kind of like your mobile harassment unit, they can move really fast, really far, especially with things like dash. And they've got a lot of decent AoE wind magic, as well as single target attacks that can deal a pretty decent chunk of damage even into the later game. The big thing is that they can stun, both single target and in AoE groups, which stun always is very nice to have. And then they also have a single target lifesteal attack that'll make it much easier for them to keep skirmishing, keep harassing enemy units, especially if they can get into the back line, which they can definitely do, fly over things, have large move range, start harassing archers and like mages, things like that they can deal decent damage to, and then stick there because they're able to restore their own life, and kind of in a way give themselves damage mitigation by stunning stuff, and then a decent chunk of the time they just won't get attacked back because the unit will be stunned and won't be able to like use their action. So the Griffin can actually be pretty nasty as a backline harassment unit. What makes the Cockatrice better, though, because it has all of those same capabilities, is the fact that it swaps the lifesteal for Petrify Breath. And that is where things get nasty. It's like once something is petrified, it can't do anything. You are completely negating its ability to have any sort of combat applicability for as long as it's petrified. No healing, no damage dealing, no tanking, nothing. Well, kind of tanking, but like, you know, it's so nasty. And being able to do it in an AoE means you can actually catch a large number of enemies at range. And with the fact that they do move so quickly, they move so far, they're still decently durable. Not the most durable thing around, but still, like, it can get really rude really, really fast. They also do have the ability to remove leaden from themselves, which, you know, kind of important for a unit that wants to be able to fly around the battlefield, but not going to be super applicable. There's not a ton of things that apply leaden, so, but it's there. It's nice. I love the Griffin and the Cockatrice. They're absolutely a ton of fun to use from the beginning to the end of the game. And I think it's the fact that they do have that really solid endgame viability that's just universally kind of good that makes them so good to me and puts them up at the top of the list. Finally, we have the Octopus. And while I love the Octopi, especially in the early game where they're super nasty, they do tend to fall off later in the game, and I think as such, I have to put them in C tier. It's probably going to be the lowest ranked monster we have unless we move down some of the dragons at the end. And we'll talk about why here. So early in the game, Octopi are great, right? They're tanky. They've got good damage dealing, especially at range. Oh my god, like the different skills that they get, like to do AoE poison and big damage, or like single target crushing damage with like their water bubble, I can't remember the name of off the top of my head, but that can deal good damage. Like let's go through what they got here. They can inflict breached and poison with their abilities. They have a bunch of crushing damage. They can inflict false strike and water reverse in melee if anything tries to walk up and hit them. The issue is that they need to be standing in water or have their Aqua Veil ability trigger to be able to use those effects. And that does become pretty limiting once you get later in the game with other monster varieties, or even just other classes in general, not that we're talking about that here, that don't have that type of limitation. Like, you already have the need for MP, but then also, even if you have the MP, you might not be able to use any of your special skills. And as good as they are, if you can't activate them, kind of puts you in a bad spot. Now, if you're on a map that has a decent water source in the middle of the battlefield, so you don't even need to worry about using Aqua Veil, now we're cooking. Now we're off to the races. But it's very map dependent when most other units aren't. At least in the similar kind of like limiting way. And I think that's what knocks Octopi down. It's a shame, and when they're good, they're great, but they just have that limitation on them that's hard to circumnavigate. Finally, we have to talk about golems, and golems are an interesting one. They actually kind of suffered not super heavily, I guess, but they had more specific roles in previous versions of the game that have pretty much all been rolled into one. Whereas in the past, you had a situation where different types of golems had, like, maybe better attack or better defense or better magic defense, different things like that. Now it's basically just a linear progression from clay to stone to iron to boulder. And the higher the rank of the golem, the better they are across the board stat-wise. They've got all the same abilities, but what's nice is that means you just have a linear progression of incredibly tanky frontline disruption unit. We'll talk about why. So the idea with golems is that they're big, they're slow, and they're durable, right? Not as durable against magic as they are against physical attacks. They're insane against physical attacks, but not terrible against magic anymore either. And they have all, and I mean all, of the Rampart Aura, durability, and versatility. They have regular Rampart Aura 2, they've got Rampart Shadow, and then they have an auto ability that will increase the rank of their Rampart Aura up to 3. So with all of those combined, you can run a golem into the enemy front line, drop a Rampart Shadow, have that increased area from their own auto ability, and suddenly nothing can move. Like, nothing can move through a massive area. And then you can do that with just one golem. Pop some sort of MP restoration, like an herb or a crystal pumpkin or something like that, and have just max MP at the start of the game. Run in there, especially if dash triggers. And now, I mean, you've just established a bulkhead with one unit. Just one little guy. Well, maybe not so little of a guy, unless you're mean, named him like teeny and tiny, but you know, it's insane. Then they have their Gordian locks that they're massively reducing the amount of damage that they take, and they actually have some decent AoE skills that can do okay damage, and they can even stun. So it's like, once you get a golem stuck in there, they're not moving unless the enemy focuses everything on them, especially with magic. And at that point, they've been such a good damage sponge and held the enemy in one position for so long that you've got the rest of your formation powered up, moved up, buffed, ready to go, and you can just start wreaking havoc with just one unit. Like, they're really, really nice, actually. And it means that you don't have to worry about having as much of a tanky, like a knight class or something like that, that's going to do similar stuff and do it well. But you can just focus it all on one golem and then just go to town. And give them some support through a warlock or a witch, which is not a bad class either if you want. So I honestly think golems are A tier just for that area control and durability. And then they can still deal decent damage and stun and all that type of fun stuff. So I really like them. Now, with everything on the list, how do I want to move stuff? Because I really feel like I should. Like, I feel, compared to some of the other options, these dragon types are honestly probably C tier. Compared to Cyclops, which I think they're just not as useful as Cyclops when you compare them to other dragon types, and then what Cyclops is able to do. They're not bad, but in the overall ranking here, I think we have to move some stuff down. And if they get moved down, I think, unfortunately, Octopi have to get moved down. So we're going to drop Octopi to D. I know there's going to be people that are unhappy with me for how I'm changing some stuff around here, but just as I've been thinking about it this whole time, definitely C tier for dragons. B tier for Cyclops feels good. I'll probably drop golems to B tier as well, even though we just dropped them in A, but I wanted to shift some stuff around. Because once you get beyond that tanking and area denial, which is not bad, don't get me wrong, but they're not contributing anything damage-wise other than that. It's a necessary role, but when you compare it to some of the things that some of these other classes are able to do, not quite as useful. And not quite as versatile either. Like, you're not always going to need that level of area control, especially in maps where you have like much more single focused lanes that you can clog up with just like a tanky guy standing there. You don't need to have the Rampart Aura denial on top of that. I think in the same vein, Hydras are getting moved down to B. Poison is nice, but having a way to directly impact how much damage enemies are dealing to you more universally, or how much damage you're dealing to them more universally, is nicer than Poison. Beyond that, though, I like where we've got Flare, Arc, and Dark Dragons. I think they're in a good spot. Griffins, I don't think are quite S tier. They're really nice skirmishers. They're great for like ferrying around items as well. I forgot to mention that, but it is really nice to have a very mobile kind of medic to go around and provide buffs, provide items. If there's a beleaguered part of your party elsewhere on the map, fly a Griffin over there, give them some healing, maybe give some MP to a mage that's running out, that type of thing. It's certainly decent. I think they're fine in A. And then, yeah, Flood Dragon and Cockatrice are definitely S tier, for sure. That feels pretty good. Yeah, guys, I think that's where we're going to leave that one. I think I'm pretty comfortable with this ranking. What do you guys think? I know there's probably going to be a lot of discussion about this. Monster units and Tactics Ogre Reborn are phenomenal. They're one of the better representation of bestial monster-type units I've ever seen in Tactics games, honestly. And that's why we can have so much discussion about it. So I welcome that discussion in the comments as well. I would like to see where y'all think these have fallen. If you have arguments for why something should be higher or lower, as always, strike up that conversation down there. I'll be in the comments chatting with y'all. But I think for now, that's where we're going to call our Tactics Ogre Reborn tier lists. I might do one last comprehensive one with all of the classes together. That'll be a hell of a discussion, but it'll be a fun one. Yeah, I think I'll probably wind up doing that. That might not be for a little while, because I'll need the time to actually put my thoughts together with it, and it'll take a long time to record and edit. But I think we will do that at some point. For now, though, the individually broken down lists, I think, are good. So, thank you all so much for watching. My name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. If you would like to support the channel, I know this is going up on a Monday, got a little bit delayed over the holiday, or over the weekend, not the holiday. But if you would like to support the channel, you can see on the side of the screen over here, there's going to be the YouTube members and patrons who directly support the channel every single month. I thank you all so much. I know everyone says it all the time, but seriously, like, especially right now when you've got algorithm changes, viewership is down, monetization is down, ad rev is down, all that type of stuff. For people who try to do YouTube as a major part of their living like myself, that direct support that I can count on from you guys every month legitimately makes it so much easier to have the time and the effort and the energy and the concentration to do videos like this so regularly. So thank you all so much. And if you would like to consider supporting and having your name represented every week in these videos, then hey, you can check out links to my Patreon and my YouTube memberships in the comments below. With that said, I'm going to wrap this up here. I hope you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there. And remember, be good to each other. Bye now, y'all.